Good evening, and welcome to this virtual author event with Eileen Gunn as part of the Clarion West virtual summer reading series, hosted in partnership with University Bookstore and the Seattle Public Library. My name is Misha Stone, she, her, and I'm a librarian in the Reader Services Department. Before we begin this event, I would like to acknowledge that Seattle is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional, unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. I also want to say that the Seattle Public Library and Clarion West stands in solidarity with the members of our community who are advocating for anti-racist practices in government and protesting against the continued oppression of Black people in America. This event is supported by Clarion West Writers Workshop, the Seattle Public Library, Foundation, author series Gary Kunis, and media sponsor the Seattle Times, and presented in partnership with University Bookstore. You can buy copies of Eileen Gunn's short story collections, Questionable Practices, and Stable Strategies and Other Stories at www.bookstore.com, ubookstore.com. Please welcome Shweta Adyam from the Clarion West Writers Workshop Board, who will be introducing the author and sharing a bit more about Clarion West.
Thank you, Misha. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for the Clarion West Summer of Science Fiction and Fantasy reading series. My name is Shweta Adyam. I am an alum of the class of 2017 and have experienced firsthand how this organization makes writers better at craft and gives them confidence in their abilities while building a mutually supportive community of readers and writers along the way. With so many changes this year, we are pleased to take our reading series virtual. Our mission is to support emerging and underrepresented voices by providing writers with world-class instruction to empower the creation of wild and amazing worlds. Through conversation and public engagement, we bring those voices to an ever-expanding community. For the first time in our history, that community is entirely online. Clarion West is growing rapidly to adjust to the needs of our writers and our greater speculative fiction community. We hope that you will join us. We are just starting the second week of the Summer Write-a-thon, our largest annual fundraiser. Adjusting for the needs of this year, we have put more focus on content and enrichment for the participating writers. Registration is free, and participants receive a weekly writing prompt from Clarion West instructors. First look at instructor-led craft talks, access to affinity groups, writing sprints, and writing classes, all free and open to anyone. We have 513 participants, our biggest write-a-thon ever, including writers from, just to name a few, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Ecuador, France, Greece, Guyana, India, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Nigeria, the Philippines, and the United States. Participants set writing goals and recruit sponsors to show their support by making a donation to Clarion West. That sponsorship is really important. It helps ensure that we can continue to grow and offer free and low-cost writing classes online, as well as more classes and workshops that are fully ADA accessible in person. During the write-a-thon, writers stretch and accomplish so much, hundreds of thousands of new words that might not otherwise exist. I encourage all of you to consider sponsoring one or more of these writers. It's easy. The link to our write-a-thon page is in the video description, or just go to www.clarionwest.org/write-a-thon. We have a week 2 fundraising challenge from the class of 2017, my class. For every donation made from now through the end of the write-a-thon, or until the challenge is met, The class of 2017 will be matching your donations one-to-one. Double your impact by donating during this challenge. You can make your donation towards the match either directly to Clarion West or to sponsor one of our 513 participating writers. If you don't have a writer in mind, you may want to browse around. Many of our participants are offering sponsor rewards. For example, class of 2019 alumnus Roscoe Lance is offering to name a character after you, and for a $125 sponsorship, Roscoe will make them a really terrible person. Before introducing tonight's reader, I want to thank all of our sponsors, including the Seattle Public Library, our event partner, the University Bookstore, Amazon Literary Partners, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, King County for Culture, and the many individual donors that support our programs. Thank you all. This reading series continues on Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. through July 21st. And we'll have a special open mic night on Monday, July 27th at 6 p.m. in partnership with 2R Transport. Please enjoy the reading and stay after for a moderated Q&A. We will take questions from anyone watching. You can enter them directly in the chat box to the right of your YouTube screen. Our ASL interpreters tonight are Laurie Reinhardt and Emily Thiel. Thank you both for being here. Our author tonight is the astute, discerning Eileen Gunn. Wry and brilliant, Eileen Gunn is a short story writer, essayist, and editor, the author of 2 short story collections, Stable Strategies and Others, Tachyon Publications 2004, and Questionable Practices, Small Beer Press 2014. Both collections are available for sale on the University Bookstore website, and there is a link in this event description. Eileen's fiction has received the Nebula Award in the US and the Sense of Gender Award in Japan. It has also been nominated for the Hugo, Philip K. Dick, and World Fantasy Awards, and shortlisted for the James Tiptree Jr. Award. Eileen was the editor and publisher of The Infinite Matrix, an early and influential SF magazine on the web from 2001 to 2008. She serves on the board of directors of the local foundation and served for 22 years on the board of directors of the Clarion West Writers Workshop. Her website is at www.eileengunn.com. Before I turn the mic over to Eileen, I'd like you all to know that Eileen will be on a panel tomorrow, sponsored by our sister workshop, Clarion at UCSD, called Writing the Future. It will also feature Ted Chiang, Lilian Rivera, Sam J. Miller, and be moderated by Kim Stanley Robinson. Please head over to clarion.ucsd.edu/Clarion-conversations to register. And now, over to you, Eileen.
Hello. I'm going to read tonight 2 stories. I'm going to read part of one story that I talked about in my talk to the Clarion students on Sunday. But no, I'm not going to read the whole story. I'm going to read about 10 pages of it as a sort of illustration of points I was making in that talk. And we can talk about the story afterwards in the chat section to explore basically what I think are interesting points about developing the story. And then I'm going to read another full story. So just don't get your hopes up to get a whole story for the first story. You'll get a whole story for the second one. The first story is called Night Shift at Nano Gobblers. I think as it was published, it was called Night Shift. And it was published by NASA. I worked with NASA engineers and with the University of Arizona to develop the story. 2032, an interplanetary gold rush has begun, and the prize is water, not gold. The miners are robots with human intelligence and superhuman survivability. All over Earth, corporations and governments are using AI robots to assay the closest asteroids and prioritize them for exploitation. A small automated colony on the moon, directed by a private company in India, is building a materials processing plant near its North Pole, using lunar regolith as a building material. It's fueling the work with solar cells and with hydrogen extracted from lunar water. The Mongolian government has claimed an area near the South Pole where it believes there is water and is deploying hydrophilic nanobots. The extraterrestrial entrepreneurs of the late 2020s populated near-Earth space with their exploratory and test equipment and filled it with aspiring asteroid miners, mostly self-directed robots. There's a fortune in raw materials up there waiting for human exploitation. There is water, which means there is hydrogen for fuel and oxygen for breathing. There is carbon, a lot of carbon. And that means there is raw material that with the proper processing can be turned into nanotubes and buckyballs and graphene and carbine, the basis for space stations and light sails and ships to carry robots to the stars. And humanity too, maybe, if they're not too fragile for the trip. In Greater Seattle, the software industry's old money has moved into the Boeing Everett factory, the empty ecological niche left when Boeing was broken up. The leaders are the guys who, after cashing out their stock and putting their names on a few marble nonprofits, watched their wealth achieve critical mass. It doubled, tripled, quadrupled, on, almost on its own, with plenty of smart financial folk lining up to keep their money from wandering off and to help it reproduce. Money has its own ecology. It grows where it grows. It doesn't grow everywhere. Over the last 50 years, human intelligence has expanded into silicon, and in the next 50, the silicon, with or without the humans, will expand into space. When I saw Seth's nanobots go into action on the live feed, I drummed a tattoo on my desk. I called over to Tanisha, who's my boss. Look at these guys. They're breeding like crazy. I was so proud of them. My little slime bots. When the bots launched, it was 3 a.m. in the lab, and I was eating a graveyard shift lunch of leftover sapasui, Samoan chop suey, comfort food for me, and watching the feed from Bennu, which showed a carpet of nanobots on the hapless asteroid, scarfing up water and methane and carbon faster than I was demolishing the sapasui. They were reproducing. They're breeding fast, and they'll chomp the hell out of that rock. Just eat it up. I rung the table again. The speed of this deployment was a first for me. Tanisha looked up from her station. Well, that's what they're supposed to do if the code is solid. Get a grip, Sina. Slime bots rule. I pushed a forkful of noodles into my mouth. I want to be part of the slime bot revolution. Tanisha laughed. That's what you're calling it, she said. Let's see how well these guys do on Bennu. We'll see if they can compete with the dumber gobblers. These bots operate on simple rules based on models of slime mold behavior. They function as a group or swarm and can transition back and forth from individual to group mode, quickly identify and capture specific molecules, and plan very efficient modes of movement and cooperation. I want to help design more bots that work like slime molds. So far, most nanominers were single-purpose bots for mining gold and platinum. Our bots are light years ahead of those guys. Plus, she said in a hectoring tone, you may know a ton about slime molds, but your coding skills should be a bit tighter. I defended myself, although she was telling the unvarnished truth. My HR file says I have an artless but effective approach to both code and design. That's what it says. You want tight code, you get an AI to write it. Tanisha grinned. You shouldn't be hacking your HR file. You'll get caught. She threw her arms up to heaven. Why is my team made up of ungovernable children? You are so much more trouble than AIs. Tanisha is the night shift lead with a decade of experience working with artificial intelligence. I've learned a lot from her about coding, about asteroids, about tweaking my attitude to make it fit in the workplace. Hey, I'm not a child, but I thought about it. She did get all the mavericks. Maybe you're supposed to teach us to govern ourselves. Tanisha smiled. Sina, if you can govern yourself, you can govern anything that walks. That's what my grandma used to say anyway. Well, I continued, swinging back to my desk, which was still updating real time minus 15 minutes. These little guys are my children, and I need to check on them. Gotta govern. She grinned. You had better hope they're governable, Sina. We don't want a Grey Goose scenario up there. But they are Seth's responsibility. Check in with her too and see what she's thinking. I rolled my eyes. Tanisha thinks Seth is a girl. I've got a special affection for Seth and the nanobots. Seth because he's so friendly, and the nanobots because they're based on slime molds. And I love slime molds. I keep them as pets, have since I was a kid. That's why I wanted the job at Nano Gobblers. And I think that's why they wanted me on this mission. Plus my tech skills, of course, my artless coding. I scarfed up the last of my lunch and went back to my station. I put on my shades, and immediately I was out there hanging above Bennu, which was pitch black against a background of stars. Sunlight glinted darkly off the asteroid, which is shaped kind of like a clumpy snowball. I love being out here. No lie, this is the best part of my job. Suddenly, I'm 400,000 kilometers away from Everett, from the heat and the rain and the money worries, perched on Seth's shoulder, looking out into the universe. Malo, Seth. Hola. Yo, what's happening? Malo le suefa, Sina, he answered like a homeboy. One of the things he does automatically is adjust to the language being spoken, learn new words and so forth. Samoan isn't one of his original languages, but I've taught him what little I know. Hey, I grew up in Seattle. Give me a break. Maybe he thinks it's a kind of English. I don't know. But it makes me feel like he's family. Also, I've dialed his voice down to a deep, sexy bass just for fun. Seth is orbiting Bennu, a near-Earth asteroid. It's about 3/4 of a kilometer away from it. The communication lag time is short, a few seconds, not much more than it would be to the moon, because Bennu is in the part of the orbit that is closest to Earth. Out here, my eyes are electronic, so I can zoom in to distinguish small rocks. It's all rocks, actually. Bennu is basically a clump of rocks. Looking out onto the asteroid, I could see things that were changing. Its crispness, its boundary, its roughness was slowly being obscured by an even gray sheen as the bots replicated, using the asteroid's own carbon to make the machines that will take it apart. I couldn't see the bots themselves, of course, but the mass of them looked like that gray goo Tanisha was talking about, the unlikely scenario in which nanobots take over the universe by turning it all into nanobots. At this point, they were still replicating and had not yet started the actual process of harvesting the asteroid. This doubling and doubling and doubling as each bot made a new one, and then the two bots made two new ones, would take about 8 hours total, 50 iterations to make 12.5 billion bots. When I took this job, it was with the thought that someday I'd get off the planet. I had no idea how wrong I was. It's way too early for ordinary humans to thrive in the rest of the solar system. AIs and robots will have all the fun in the near term, and the entrepreneurs will do the thriving. But I'm happy that I get to watch. Even as a kid, I was infatuated with space travel. Maybe it's because of my mother who named me Masina, which means moon in Samoan. In city housing in Seattle, I loved watching flyby videos, zooming over Pluto and Charon, seeing the pale, bleak landscapes passing swiftly beneath my imagined ship. Nitrogen glaciers and canyons of frozen methane, deep crevasses and strange round holes. When the OSIRIS-REx probe touched down in 2023, Ta and I jumped up and down like crazy people. Or maybe it was because of my dad. Maybe that's where it all came from originally. The Christmas that I was 5, my dad had downloaded some free outer space gaming software and bought cheap flight simulator controls, a couple of joysticks, some plastic throttles and foot pedals, and hooked up to our PC. To me and Ta, it was like piloting the New Horizons probe. We loved it. All 3 of us loved it. And it was multiplayer, a real family game. Mo, my dad, when he had the job at Boeing, liked to joke that he worked in the aerospace industry. Yeah, he'd say with a serious nod, I'm in aerospace. Then he'd add with a smile, I fly a forklift for Boeing. He'd worked at the Renton plant since we had come over from Honolulu, where my brother and I were born. Growing up in Samoa 40, 50 years ago, he said he dreamed of space and dreamed of flight, and he was going to make sure we kids had what we needed to do whatever we wanted to do. And that part was no joke. Now I work nights at Nanogobblers, a nanotech startup in that big old building at Payne Field, north of Seattle. 20 years ago, when I was born, it belonged to Boeing, and it was the biggest building in the world. But that was then, and now it's a walled city of nanotech developers, stacked box cars full of cubicles and testing labs and people in windowless but air-conditioned rooms. Not exactly the glamorous part of the space industry, but this is the job that is putting me through college. I get an engineering degree, I'll be able to get a real job building the habitats. Maybe even get to go out to them. Night shifts are quiet. Basically, I just do installation monitoring for nanobot missions, partner with the AI, make sure the bots are working, make sure the incoming data is streaming, check the functionality of the local devices, fix or replace anything that isn't working, answer any questions the AI has. The techs come in at 8 a.m. and I go off to class. Sleep? Who needs it? The other night shifters and I are the space tech equivalent of gophers. Low paid, software savvy since we were kids. We work nights and weekends in the startups that are competing for piecework in asteroid mining, nanoware design, testing, and operations management. All nano, all the time. We knew we were lucky to have the jobs, the training, and the economy. As soon as the development cost is low enough, these jobs will be held by AIs. I'm hoping I'll be promoted by then into another job the AIs can't do yet. It's musical chairs staying ahead of the AIs. The air transportation business fled Everett with the Boeing company, and my dad's job went with them. There are no forklifts anymore, no forklifts and no jobs for old guys who graduated from some island high school. Mo got a job in a Samoan sandwich shop. Not great money, but he said that leftover barbecue was an employee benefit that Boeing had never offered. My dad looks on the bright side. And I think that I will stop here. This is not the scariest part, but it gets scarier after that. So I think I'll start here and completely change course. I'm going to read a story entitled Terrible Trudy on the Lam. And the story has an interesting origin story of its own, which we can talk about in the chat part of the program. It was a whim, a momentary desire to see what lay outside the zoo. But once Trudy had taken a walk around San Diego, once she'd tasted freedom, she was determined not to go back. She would make this work. At first, she lived in the city's lovely dark storm drains, emerging every night to forage for yummies in Balboa Park. But she knew herself an idol would not last forever. She needed a long-term plan. and after a week of pondering the matter, she put one together. A job was the first order of business, something that would keep her in shoots and leaves, and hopefully something she could do evenings. She was, of course, as the zookeepers had told her time and time again, an odd-toed crepuscular ungulate. Twilight was her very best time of day, though she could go all night if she had to. She considered roller skating. Bears do it, elephants do it, even penguins roller skate. And at that time, roller skating couples in evening dress were becoming a popular nightclub entertainment. Why not tapirs? At first, Trudy thought maybe a prey-predator act would be exciting, since tapirs have been known to bite viciously when cornered, and that could be milked for comic effect. But tigers, the Malayan tapir's principal predator, rarely roller skate well. They consider it undignified, and often, when strapped into skates, just lie on their backs with their feet in the air, as if expecting a belly rub. Trudy considered putting together an act with another prey animal, but she was wary of partners. Not every roller skater who said she was a vegetarian was committed to nonviolence. In the end, Trudy decided to go it alone. A kindly shoemaker created custom open-toed roller skates for her to show off her tiny hoofed toes, 3 on each back foot, 4 on each foot in the front. The boots were made of red leather, which contrasted elegantly with Trudy's silver shoulders and black flanks. A black bow tie and a starched white collar pulled the whole ensemble together in a dignified and professional way. A refined Marlene Dietrich look, Trudy thought, right to the silver tracings on the tips of her ears. She practiced skating late at night after the rink had closed and everyone had gone home. It was dark, but tapirs have poor eyesight, and she was accustomed to tiptoeing around in a dusky forest. Eventually, the groundskeeper discovered she had broken into the rink through an unused storage closet, and the jig was up. But perfected a hilarious pantomime routine. She skittered out onto the dance floor, flailing about and threatening to crash into tables along its edge, then regaining her composure and performing a series of graceful loops and twirls, ending in an axel, loop, double mapes, Euler double flip. Audiences loved it. In performance, the finale always drew gasps from the tables, and they took Trudy to her hearts. San Diegans, grieving and distressed after the attack on Pearl Harbor the previous year, sought consolation in bars and supper clubs, and Terrible Trudy, the roller skating tapir, was a hit. Hollywood celebrities flocked to San Diego, ostensibly to perform for the troops at the naval base, but really to catch Trudy's act at the Chi-Chi Supper Club, a hot new nightclub with the South Seas theme. Trudy sometimes added a lei to her costume. It also served as a midnight snack. As Trudy's star rose, so did her worries about the zoo director, the indomitable Belle Benchley. Mrs. Benchley had pioneered the modern, natural-looking, cageless zoo. Trudy had rejected Benchley's carefully simulated enclosure, and Trudy's wanderlust had challenged the woman to the core. Mrs. Benchley knew Trudy was living in La Jolla and working openly at the Chi-Chi Club, but had made no effort to contact her. How long would this détente last? At first, Trudy seemed to be nonchalance itself. She flirted with members of the audience of any gender who caught her eye. If an object or an article of clothing attracted her interest, she would take possession of it, though she usually returned it to the owner at the end of her set. In such a fashion, she acquired a fedora, and she instantly made it a permanent part of her act. A huge fan of the singer Jimmy Durante, Trudy interspersed her spectacular skating routine with Durante imitations, just as Durante would pause in the middle of a song and break into a quick comedy routine, then return to the song as if nothing had happened. Turns out she was a very affecting singer with a sense of comedic timing that rivaled Durante's own. Not to mention, she had a schnozola that even Durante envied. The crowds went wild. But the stress began to tell on Trudy, who knew that at any moment, Mrs. Benchley could, on a whim, decide to bring Trudy back to the zoo in his fake Malayan rainforest. Trudy had no legal leg to stand on. As she had been reminded by her lawyers time and again, she was the property of the San Diego Zoo. Trudy began downing a quick Tonga punch, or maybe two, before the show, just to keep her courage up. One evening, she went a bit further than two and had not sobered up by the showtime. She went on anyway, rather than disappoint the crowd, and the revelers took her markedly sloppy routine as a clever commentary on the club MC, who was notorious for never showing up to work sober. People laughed and laughed, and their wild reception of her wacky skate dance encouraged her to act out even more. She was careening between the supper tables on one foot, waving the other three in the air, picking up customers' champagne glasses with her schnoz, and singing Inka-Dinka-Doo, when suddenly her luck ran out and her wheels caught on a crack in the floor. Had she been sober and standing on all 4 feet, I inadvertently lost my place at this most exciting part. Let's go back to the paragraph. She was careening between the supper tables on one foot, waving the other three in the air, picking up customers' champagne glasses with her schnoz, and singing Inka-Dinka-Doo, when suddenly her luck ran out and her wheels caught on a crack in the floor. Had she been sober and standing on all 4 feet, she could have recovered, but that was not the case. Trudy went flying and landed on top of a table occupied by William Randolph Hearst and his paramour Marion Davies. Drenched in expensive champagne, Miss Davies fled the nightclub, leaving her ermine evening wrap and Mr. Hearst. As the newspapers told the story, Mr. Hearst immediately bestowed the ermine on Trudy to console her for her embarrassment. Miss Davies later vowed publicly never again to leave either her clothing or her man alone in Trudy's presence, declaring, "That little rhinoceros minx has an elevated opinion of her own attractiveness." Here we must acknowledge that, although tapirs and rhinoceroses are among the few odd-toed ungulates, tapirs are not rhinoceroses, and neither of them are minks. Trudy, realizing that her career as a headliner at the Chi-Chi Club had come to an end, saluted the audience with her fedora, ad-libbed Durant's signature clothing, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are," and lit out for LA as fast as she could travel, just one step ahead of Mrs. Benchley. She was only a tapir, making her lonely way in this dreadful world, but she knew when to call it a night. It took just a couple of hours to bus from San Diego to Los Angeles, and by midnight, Trudy, clutching her ermine stole about her, emerged from the Greyhound station on Los Angeles Street. She knew that pretty soon she'd need some kind of fake ID, but right then she sure hoped the cops wouldn't stop an innocent-looking young tapir in a classy fur wrap. The few passengers on the late-night bus from San Diego scattered like roaches when you turn off the light. It was a quiet night. Just a few people napped on the station's benches. No street traffic at all, really. Trudy was alone in LA and had no real idea of where to go. She was pretty sure that LA had storm drains and that the gardens of Beverly Hills would provide sustenance. She was also under the impression that Beverly Hills was somewhere north of the Greyhound station, which was true enough. She struck out at once, heading north towards Olvera Street, and what she had heard were some of the most colorful sections of the city. The wind was off the ocean, and she could smell the salt air. After just a few blocks, she left the dreary bus station shabby street and entered a neighborhood of trim little wooden bungalows. It smelled good. It smelled edible, in fact. Maybe she should have a nosh here, she thought. Why hold out for Beverly Hills? She reached for some greenery and was nibbling it delicately when she noticed a man in the shadows, crouched next to a 1937 Oldsmobile. The streetlights were dim and one to a block, But Trudy's eyesight was best in low light situations, so she had no problem picking him out. He was wearing a crumpled serge suit with an ugly striped tie that had slipped askew. His fedora was battered in a way that suggested he habitually sat on it. A pint of something alcoholic stuck out of his jacket pocket. He looked slightly dangerous and unmistakably up to no good. Trudy caught his eye. He raised his eyebrows, nodded to Trudy, and cool as a frozen daiquiri, brought his left index finger to his lips and gave her a stern, cautionary glance. She nodded slightly in return. She would give him a chance to explain himself, she thought. Then, suddenly, he leaped up, holding a huge flash camera in both hands, and aimed it into the back seat of the Olds, photographing the car's interior. The flash lit up the scene, and a high-pitched scream came from the car. The photographer broke away, ran like hell down the driveway right next to Trudy, and disappeared into a large privet hedge that Trudy had been considering for dessert. The driver's side door of the Olds pushed open, and a partly dressed guy leaped out, clutching a wrench. He spotted Trudy and shouted, "Where'd he go?" Trudy didn't care to be addressed so rudely. She gestured towards Beverly Hills, and he started down the street a few yards, then stopped. He turned around and came back to the car, buttoning his yellow and pink Hawaiian shirt with a truculent look on his face. "Get your things on, babe," he said to the person inside. "I'll take you home, and then I'll deal with the gumshoe." A woman said something low and muley, but Trudy couldn't make out what it was. "I'll pay him off, that's what. I'll take care of him. Don't worry about it." He leaped into the car, started it, threw it in gear, and they clattered off down the street. Trudy made her move on the privet, which was as tasty as she thought it would be. The blackmailer, for that's surely what he was, emerged from the hedge. "They gone?" He kept his voice low, and he mumbled. Trudy, her mouth full of fresh privet, simply nodded. "I like a dame can keep her mouth shut," the man said. He held out his hand. "Name's Mumble," he said. "For Trudy nodded again. That couldn't be his name, she knew, but it was really hard to understand him. No matter. She ignored his hand and continued to chew the privet. "Divorce case," he said, tilting his head towards where the Olds had been parked. He lowered his hand. "That mug's been out with a different floozy every night. His old lady'll take him for every penny he's got." Trudy just looked at him. Not a blackmailer, a PI. "You keep your own counsel, I can tell," said the man. Trudy continued to keep her own counsel. "You need a job, kid? You look hard up wandering around in the middle of the night eating people's shrubbery." It was clear to Trudy that either he hadn't noticed the ermine stole or he thought it was part of a taper standard equipment. But the question and the man's concern softened her reserve. She nodded her head vigorously. "I could use an assistant, someone who keeps their mouth shut, you know what I mean?" Trudy shrugged, but didn't deny that, yes, she could keep her mouth shut. "I'm a private dick, and I do mean private." He spoke a little louder, a little more clearly. "But I could use a dame to handle surveillance. You over 18? Trudy nodded again, though actually she was only 5. Seemed right, though, just past adolescent. "Well, come along then, the jalape's over here. I gotta get these pics developed. Lady's gonna be filing for divorce, needs her flagrante delicto." I don't want to be anybody's assistant, thought Trudy. I want to be the detective. I want to find the flagrante delictos. But I guess I'll deal with that later. She followed Bert Mumble to his car. And that was how Trudy happened to be in the front room of the detective's office later that night, filling out an application for a PI license when the irate adulterer came by with a shotgun. She saw his blurred form through the pebbled glass panel in the office door, and she recognized his pink and yellow shirt as the one on the guy who had driven off in the Olds just a few hours before. Trudy was pretty sure that whatever her job turned out to be, some of it would involve running interference when people with whom the private eye had dealt in a professional capacity dropped by to discuss matters. So she put down her pencil and waited for the knock. The knock, it turned out, was the crash of the butt end of a shotgun coming through the pebbled glass. Trudy dashed forward, heedless of flying glass shards. The visitor aimed the shotgun directly into the PI's private office. Trudy reached over with her prehensile proboscis and pushed down hard on the barrel. The gun went off and sent a load of buckshot through the open office door and right into the front of the detective's desk. Trudy pressed her attack, making low-pitched, hollow grunts and emphasizing them with piercing whistles. She tilted her head back and waggled her long phallic snout, raising it like an elephant's trunk to reveal deep behind her huge fleshy lips a set of choppers as blunt and massive as those of a horse. She gave the man an emphatic bite on the arm, then reached over with her snout and grabbed the shotgun right out of his hands. The guy let it go. He seemed to have lost interest in it completely and was staring at Trudy in complete disbelief. The detective appeared at the door to his office, and his would-be assailant turned to him with a look of helpless appeal. "If that's a dog, it's the weirdest damn dog I've ever seen. What the hell is it?" "My little sister, you got a problem?" The detective took the gun from Trudy and stashed it behind his desk. "Your sister, it's got horse feet for toes, and it's wearing fur spats. It looks like two different animals put together, a white one in the front and a black one in the back." He seemed on the verge of hysteria. "You know, Buster, you look like you were put together from spare parts yourself. I don't think you ought to be insulting my sister's protective coloration. May I inquire as to the purpose of your visit?" Trudy was surprised and pleased to hear the gumshoe defend her like that. She had thought he wasn't any too thrilled to be told that she wanted to be a detective. In her experience, men did not take kindly to females of any persuasion who aspired to their jobs. Perhaps this one was different. "Give me the negs," said the miscreant. "You know what's good for you. Give me them right now." "You're not in a great position to make demands, buddy," said the detective. "You want, the cops can make you a set of prints suitable for framing." The man leaped up for the shotgun, but the quick-witted gumshoe kicked it away. Then the fellow pulled a knife. Unarmed and taken by surprise, the detective grabbed an office chair and raised it to keep his attacker at a distance. But it was clear to Trudy that he was not going to win a fight against a thug with a knife. She looked about for a weapon, or at least something she could grab and throw. Her eye fell upon her ermine stole. It was fluffy and soft and white, a garment that made her feel like the cutest little bunny in the world. But she knew that ermine were basically weasels in white coats. Vicious, the stole would distract the knife-wielding adulterer, perhaps tapping into an atavistic human fear of the weasel. Trudy grabbed the stole with her snout and waved it as if teasing a bull to get the intruder's attention. He looked up and stared at her in baffled panic. What was the beast doing now? Trudy flung the stole at the intruder, and it wrapped fuzzily around its head like a flying squirrel. The detective quickly picked up the shotgun and hit the knife out of the panicked miscreant's hand. 5 minutes later, the fellow was neatly trussed and tied to the chair, and Trudy, wrapped again in the ermine, sat with her new boss on the wooden anteroom bench, awaiting the arrival of Detective Lieutenant Breeze. The detective poured them each a shot of Old Forester. "You got it, kid," he said, tipping his glass towards her. "You're cool-headed, aware of your surroundings, and deft at improvised distraction. I'll see that your PI certification is approved." He downed his glass and poured another one. You've got a job here with me as long as you want it, if you don't mind occasional gunplay. Trudy thought about it. She knew there would come a day when she would flee the dark, cynical world of the LA gumshoe, just as she'd fled the sleepy San Diego Zoo and the tacky Ritz of the Cheat Sheet Club. It might well involve gunplay and hot pursuit, and that was okay with her. The thing you want when you're a prey animal, Trudy thought, is intermittent excitement. She could have a decent, happy life as the occasional target of someone's violent intentions because she loved the pure energy of being chased. She bore no malice towards those pursuing her, and her heart soared at every triumphant escape. She wondered if Mumble, whatever his name was, who, like most detectives, lived for the chase, would understand. Maybe she'd ask him sometime, but not now. Trudy nodded to Philip Mumble and took a sip of bourbon. She smiled a hidden, taper smile. Mrs. Benchley might yet track her down, but for the time being, she had escaped, and she had a job. Life was good. That's the end, but there's an author's note, and I am the author, and I will read it to you. Terrible Trudy was a resident of the San Diego Zoo in the 1940s and 50s. Her escapes caught the popular imagination, but eventually zoo director Belle Benchley tracked her down and persuaded her to return and stay put. Trudy died of comfortable old age in 1959 in retirement at a rainforest habitat in the San Diego Zoo. Mrs. Benchley, influential in her advocacy of humane animal habitats for zoos, followed in 1972. Thank you. That is the end of the reading period, and we can start thinking about questions. Misha, do you have questions?
That was an utterly delightful story, Eileen. That was, I actually remember, I think in 2017, you were you gave us a talk, and I think you might have been in the middle of writing the story because I think you told us something about, I forget the animal, but I feel like it had to be this one, about an animal trying to escape a zoo and live her own life. Maybe it was this one.
Yeah, it probably was.
Well, that's amazing. I'm glad to see this is closure. I'm glad to see, glad to hear it read by you. This was amazing. All right, we are waiting for questions. Let's see.
No questions?
It was just completely clear. Everything was completely clear. Well, okay, since there are no questions from the audience, I'm going to start with the kind of question that drives authors absolutely nuts.
Okay.
Okay, there is a question from the audience. What sparked your interest in the slime molds?
What sparked it originally was a video that I saw on TV maybe 20 some years ago. And it was fantastic. It was I would love to find it somewhere. And I've looked online for it, and I did find little excerpts from it. But it was a slime mold researcher. It was all in black and white. It was probably done in the 60s or something. And he was talking about slime molds like they were his children. And he was starting to get weepy about his aunt who was ill and the slime molds. And he had these fantastic images, movies of slime molds, macroscopic. And they were wonderful little critters. They were just so strange and wonderful. And then I watched this video at a friend's house, and I kept remembering it. I wanted to see it again. And I contacted him and he said, oh, I erased that. I don't know where that came from. So I became obsessed with the slime molds, and with finding a copy of the video, which 20 years ago was a lot harder than it is now. Eventually I found it. If you search on the web for slime mold videos, eventually you will find parts of this one. Nothing is ever as fabulous and wonderful as that first impression, however. So that is my start of slime molds. And I am just as enthusiastic about slime molds as my protagonist.
That's fascinating. I have to look up those videos.
Yeah.
Second question. Do you have plans to write a series of mysteries based on that Animal Gum show? I know I would read that.
No. I think that the estate of Dashiell Hammett might get involved if I actually did a series of detectives. The origins of that story however, are that Karen Joy Fowler, who doesn't remember doing this, sent a tweet to Kelly Link with a link to a little article on the San Diego Zoo website about Terrible Trudy. And it was, and I read it, because I follow Kelly, and I thought, oh God. I read the article, and it was great. She kept escaping. She was away for 8 days, and nobody knew where she was. She's the size of a small refrigerator. She's the size of a large freezer. And they lost her in San Diego. All of San Diego was looking for the missing tapir from the San Diego Zoo. After 8 days, they found that she was living in the storm drains, which were big in Balboa Park. They have a massive range in San Diego. And so she was living in the storm drains, and she'd come out at twilight because they're crepuscular. They like twilight and dawn. And she'd eat in the zoo, in the park. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody noticed great amounts of vegetation going missing, apparently. But they did eventually find her and take her back to the exhibit. And Belle Benchley was a very forward-looking zoo administrator. She is the person that pioneered cageless zoos. And she had developed this Indonesian rainforest just for her tapir. And the tapir didn't want to stay in it. So I was fascinated by this. And I thought, and it wasn't my tweet. It was Karen's tweet. And she'd sent it to Kelly. So it was Kelly's story to tell, as far as I could see, if Karen didn't want to tell it. And I waited, and finally I tweeted to Kelly, that tapir would make a really nice girl detective. And Kelly's like, I'm writing a novel, get off my back. And I said, well, we could collaborate on this. And she's like, no, I'm writing a novel. She's still writing the novel. And it's the same novel. She's still writing it. And
we all know that struggle.
Yeah, me too. I'm still writing the same novel I was writing 10 years ago. So I realized eventually that I had to do it myself. First, I tried writing the beginning section where she escapes and gets the roller skates. And I sent it to Kelly, and she, again, I'm writing my novel, leave me alone. So I thought, well, it wouldn't be a good thing to interrupt Kelly and her novel. So I wrote the story.
That's amazing. And that actually also takes care of the question that I was going to ask you, which is, where did you find your inspiration for this story? So 2 in 1.
Inspiring. I actually read this story last year at a convention that Karen was at. And Kelly, I don't think Kelly was at it, but Karen was at it. And she has no recollection of sending the tweet. And I was so concerned about the origin of my story that I actually looked up the tweet in Twitter. You can do that in Twitter. You can look up, and yes, Karen has sent me that tweet. And I got to read the story to her.
Well, okay, so we have quite a few questions that have rolled in. We have one from Julie McGalliard. Eileen, do you like the San Diego Zoo?
I personally have never lived in the San Diego Zoo, so I can't pass judgment on it one way or the other. But I've heard very good things about Mrs. Benchley.
Fair enough. One from Evan Peterson. Eileen, do you set out with a tone in mind, or does the story provide it?
I don't set out really with anything in mind. I just set out. So if I get something that sparks my imagination, like the taper, that was a story that just kind of, once I started writing it, I can't say it wrote itself because my stories hardly ever write themselves, but it was fun to write. And all the time I was writing, I kept thinking, nobody but me will be amused by this. This is a story that nobody will buy. No, it doesn't fall into, what is it? Is it fantasy? It's not science fiction. Nobody's going to want it. People won't understand it. They won't get all of these World War II jokes and performers that were old hat when I was a baby. They won't get it. But I read it to audiences that I could hear, unlike this audience, which I would love to have been able to hear if you were laughing at my jokes. But I've read it to audiences that I can hear, and people do seem to get the jokes for some weird reason. Was that an answer to your question, Evan? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we don't get the feedback, so I hope it does answer Evan's question.
He can ask me a question anytime.
Yes. And moving on to the next one. How do you deal with the internal pressure to write fast and a lot with the actual requirements of your research/writing/revision process? How do you keep feeling good about it?
I don't think I quite understand.
I think all the writers in the world.
I don't quite understand the question. I'm a little deaf and I forgot to put in my hearing aids. So let me turn you up a little bit.
Okay.
And ask me again.
Okay. How do you deal with the internal pressure to write fast and a lot with the actual requirements of your research/writing/revision process? How do you keep feeling good about it?
I don't feel good about it. It's terrible. It's really awful. I wish I was a faster writer. But I'd be a different writer if I was faster, I think. When I'm writing, I am constantly revising what I'm writing and constantly reimagining it. And for me, that's part of the fun of taking something that's familiar and breaking it, making it different. And that takes a while. It takes a while to add and this another odd little thing here. And to see the things vividly. And then, eventually the story goes out and somebody buys it, mostly. I don't think I actually have any unsold stories that I've sent out.
That's amazing.
But yeah, it's not a good thing. I can't recommend it to anybody. Write faster.
Does writing ever feel good, I wonder, to anyone?
There are people. Kate Wilhelm used to say that she loved writing. Writing made her feel good. I know that Katie doesn't lie, but I tend to think that maybe she was exaggerating a bit.
All right. We have our next question from Einstein R. Do you find today's new writers' worlds in stories lacking? If so, what advice would you give to upcoming writers to create believable worlds?
I don't find new writers lacking. I think the writers that are coming up are great. There are lots of different writers, and different writers appeal to different people. Mm-hmm. So I do have my favorite writers. There are writers I like, and there are writers that I don't get right now, but I'll keep reading them. And I hope to get them in the future. There are writers I will probably never get or be interested in what they're writing. But that doesn't mean they're not great writers. And it doesn't mean that thousands and hundreds of thousands of other people aren't interested in it. So I don't have any prejudice against people writing something that doesn't personally interest me. I write stuff that doesn't personally interest a lot of editors, I've noticed. So advice for making things more interesting, for weirding things up, turn things inside out, juggle things, read a lot, follow up. I mean, this is the problem with this is what makes me slow. Follow up every weird little rabbit hole that you come to. See what's down that rabbit hole. If you don't go down that rabbit hole, nobody will go down that rabbit hole. So you might as well do it, And for the taper story, I researched the bars in San Diego in 1941. Wow. And I picked one and I went to it virtually. It's not only I think the bar closed in 1957 or something, but it's got its own website and there's pictures and stuff like that. So I over-research everything, but that's why, that story's got a lot of detail. When I'm reading it, I think, where did I find that? Who knew that? I've forgotten where I got all the stuff, but I got it by going down every rabbit hole that presented itself. Gosh, so that's my advice. And make it weird. I read to the students on Sunday a little sort of found poem from Bruce Sterling about getting weird. The finale of which is, get weird, get really weird. Don't go halfway. Grow spikes from every angle. Don't be smooth and friendly, because smooth and friendly people are dull. Stick in their throats like a puffer fish. So I love that. That's a Sterling rant at its best, and I love the puffer fish at the end.
Yep. So,
because I personally like puffer fish. So, do that. That is my advice, is don't be smooth and well-rounded. Stick in their throats like a puffer fish.
That is fantastic advice. Our next question is from Joel Donato Jacob. Could you reverse engineer the story for us in the mystery / strangeness / randomness / intimacy element that you introduced yesterday?
Oh gosh, sure I can. The intimacy stuff is, what is it? What did I use? I don't know. I used my own experience as a woman working in technology, okay, to be a taper trying to get a job as a detective. And let's see, whatever. Weird is the easy part, okay? If you can't find the weird in that story, you're not looking hard enough. What were the others? I don't know. I had 4 and now I've forgotten them entirely. What you have, Shweta, you have the...
Yes, mystery, strangeness, randomness, and intimacy.
Okay. Now, the roller skating taper is strange. The whole story of the taper escaping from the zoo is strange. It's meant, I took the story, that's a real taper who escaped from a real zoo. And I made her strange. The mystery part is we really don't know how she's talking to people. Supposedly she can sing like Jimmy Durante.
Yeah.
But, tapers really they're kind of equipped. I've listened to taper sounds. They don't make a lot of different sounds. They make a sound kind of like a small, hesitant donkey, I guess. And they're related to horses, so that makes sense. And they're also related to rhinoceroses. I tried to put as many actual facts in the story as I could without making it overly factual.
Yes.
I think that gets everything in. I chose that story to read because I felt it fit well with the talk I gave the students. The other story also fits well because the slime molds are the weird thing. The mystery part isn't in the part that I read, but the computer, Seth, starts watching movies and he gets really hung up on characters in movies named Seth. And he gets very, very interested in The Fly. And that gets sort of weird. And it's And, which was a movie that came out for anybody that hasn't seen it about 20 plus years ago. And the tagline for the promotion was, "Be afraid, be very afraid." So that adds a certain weirdness and mystery, and you never really find out whether Seth is intelligent AI or whether he simply is really good at manipulating human language. I mean, you don't have to manipulate human language really well to sound like a human, right, and to engage humans in talking to the computer. So the mystery part is that that's not what the story's about. It doesn't go there.
Awesome. We have a question from Misha. Eileen, who are some of your favorite SF writers who use humor in their work?
Some writers use humor sometimes and not others. So, like, one of my favorite writers, and really a person whose approach to fiction I don't emulate, but I admire, is William Gibson. And I think a lot of Gibson's stuff, his sense of humor is not always noticed by people who are reading him for adventure. But I think he's a very, a wonderfully funny writer. It's just Bruce Sterling. So the novel that they wrote together, The Difference Engine, is a particularly funny novel. Mm-hmm. And the more you know about 18th century, 19th century history and novels and characters, the people who made the 19th century what it is, the funnier that novel is. Mm. So I do have to rank him, especially working with Sterling, as an immensely funny writer. Howard Waldrop is a really funny writer. Now, what was the question? There was a question part about it, not just names of writers. What was the question part?
That was just the question part. Who are some of your favorite?
Which writers? Okay. When I was making a list of writers for the students, I realized that most of the writers I was putting there as weird and funny writers were people essentially of my generation. So Waldrop, Gibson, Leslie Watt, who's a bit younger than me, Carol Emshwiller, who is a bit older than me. Carol Emshwiller is a wonderfully funny writer. And her short stories are hilarious. And I mean, I know that I'm leaving people out because I'm not good at generating lists. It's one of those intelligence test things that I don't do very well. Just generate lists from a prompt.
Yeah, it's sometimes really tough. It's like when someone asks me, what have you been reading recently? And I'm like,
right.
I don't know.
So Andy Duncan, okay, who just taught his part of Clarion West.
Yeah.
Andy Duncan is a hilarious writer. And when he reads, he's even funnier. He didn't do a reading with the devil in it this past week, but his concept of the devil is both demonic and hilarious. He's not. I wouldn't want to mess with that devil. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to mess with his character Perline either. But she can sort of handle the devil.
We have a question from Susan Gossman. What are you working on right now?
What am I working on right now? I'm working on a ghost story that I've been working on since I was much younger. It's 10 years easy. And it's kind of a noir ghost story. It's hard to write. It's hard to write. For one thing, I don't believe in ghosts, so, and it's from the point of view of the ghost. So she's really there. And we'll see what it's like, for every story that I write before I've tried it out on people as an actual printed piece. I wonder, will anybody find this as interesting as I'm finding it while I'm writing it? I never really expect people to understand what I write. And so I'm always pleasantly surprised when people, whether they understand it or not, I don't give them tests. at least I like it.
And we have a question from Andy Duncan, actually. Eileen, your taper story seems an example of something you do brilliantly. Treat an absurd premise with great seriousness, thus making it both funnier and richer. Do you think of it this way at all?
I think that's just how I think. I don't think I try to do it. But I grew up in a household that was very funny. And both my parents were artists, and they observe things, I observe things. That's one of the things that's fun about walking with Nisi Shawl. Nisi and I used to go for a couple mile walks. And she notices these things too. So we would both notice these things, and we wouldn't have to point them out to one another. Mm-hmm. We could just talk about them without saying, hey, did you see that? No, she saw it too. She always saw it too. So I think that it's a combination of, my point of view is that, yeah, the world is tragic and funny. That's something that I do try to do that. And the reason I try to do that is that I observed it in Leslie Watt's writing when we were students at Clarion, and afterward when she was writing. One of the things that Leslie does really, really well is she's hilariously funny and heartbreakingly tragic in her stories. Just amazing combination of these two things. And so I thought, well, that's a worthy goal. So I think Leslie inspired me. I'd have to go back over my early stories and see before I met Leslie if they were heartbreaking and tragic, and funny at the same time. But I think they were just aimed to be funny. I think Leslie taught me about tragedy.
We have a response from Einsteiner, who asked a question earlier, and they say, thank you, awesome response. And here's another question from a write-a-thon participant, Cosmata Lindy. I have been following the prompt you provided for the write-a-thon and came up with the weirdest but oddly coherent writing I have ever done. Are these the sort of surrealist imagery that inspire you? And I think this may be our last question of the evening. So take it away, Eileen.
That's great. I'm glad that they work. I don't know what inspires me. Those images by Varro are amazing. Remedios Varro. And then they just looked like good prompts. I don't like prompts in general because to me, they always fall flat. That's the idea of a prompt. It's supposed to be open and you can take it anyway. But I always argue with them, and then I get grumpy, and then I write something in response to the prompt that, to make the world understand how stupid it was. And, so I don't like verbal prompts. I don't like creating an object like that will be ludicrous to me. But I do like things that come into my head. And I do I really don't use prompts. I think I tried using them to jumpstart my writing maybe 20 years ago or so, but it didn't really work. And it made me unhappy. So no, I like finding ideas. The web is an amazing resource of ideas. Ideas don't help you with plots, though, and the plotting is the hardest point.
Yeah.
Ideas are sort of innate. We all have ideas. A lot of people reject their ideas. This is the advantage of being raised by artists, is that I was taught that ideas were good and that you followed them and you kept encouraging yourself to have more of them. They weren't. And then I went to the Catholic high school where they taught you to not have ideas. Thank you very much. I followed it with a Catholic college that said, ideas will exercise you. So I feel I went to the wrong college. It was a good high school. It was a prep high school. But I went to the wrong college. And if I'd gone to art school, I'd probably have been a happier camper. Because ideas are all around you. And words are all around you. I mean, if you pick some sentence that you like from some other writer, jump off it, and then take that sentence out before it controls your mind. But let your mind wander, jump off, have ideas. Don't censor your ideas until there's so many of them that you have to cut a few so the others can breathe. I guess that's basically my advice to all beginning writers is don't censor yourself. Don't try to follow how other people say you should write. I'm not saying don't listen to them. I'm just saying don't try to follow their advice. Listening to them can give you ideas, but try things out. But don't let other people give you your ideas. Make your own ideas. And the part that I was telling the students says it about intimacy is that one of the things I like to do is put something in my work that I'd taken from my own life, even if the story is about a roller skating taper. Also, I used to roller skate as a kid. I did rink skating. And so I put some of that in. And, just if you've had a nice life, you can just grab parts of it. Even if you had an awful life, you can grab parts of it and put it in your fiction and recreate it. You can turn the bad into something that you control. And actually, that might be what I'm doing in the ghost story. The ghost story kind of comes out of an experience I had where I was attacked as I was going home at night by a stranger. And the story kind of comes out of that. It's not a story about somebody being attacked by a stranger, however. It's about somebody making some really bad decisions that led to her being killed. So then it's not an unfunny story. I don't think it's certainly not my funny story. It's not a laugh riot like the Taper story, but she has her voice and she has her own perception of who she is and her reality. And I think she's kind of funny. She's sarcastic anyway.
Well, I hope we get to hear that story sometime. I'm getting greedy now that the story that we heard you talk about 3 years ago, I've just heard. So anyway, it is time to wrap up for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for your excellent questions. And last and definitely not the least, thank you, Eileen, for your amazing stories and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Joyta. Thank you, everybody that's shown up. This was really fun. Thank you. And thank you to the interpreters who have been really, Emily and Laurie. Thank you both very much. And they didn't even get to look at the first story before I started mouthing it. So they did fantastic on both the stories. Thank you.
Thank you.